Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Film Score Podcast. Today, my guest is CJ Mirra, who just made his feature film debut with the new indie UK horror film, A Banquet. Although, to be fair, when I call it a horror film, in a lot of ways it's really a family domestic drama that's heightened so much it falls into some horror and supernatural territory. CJ's score actually was just released on Burning Witches Records a few weeks back, and as a really cool combination of strange, noisy sounds, atmospherics, and hints of melody. So it's available everywhere, and the film itself, I believe, is available to rent digitally. Just left UK theaters a couple weeks ago. Interestingly, CJ's also done about 20 or so short surf films, and they're not what you'd expect. It's not like he's doing covers of Miserlou or something. They kind of span the sonic palette, and he has a compilation from 2018 that features a bunch of choice cues from these various films, which frankly are really cool. And coming up on the horizon, he's actually scoring an Apple series about surfing as well, and be having his debut solo album, coming out soon too, called CJ's Mirra Maze. And you can find out more about CJ by visiting his website, and of course, you can do the same for me. Now, things are slowly starting to wind down at Film Score HQ, but I certainly have at least 2 more months of good interviews on the way. Keep your ears open for those, but in the meantime, sit back and enjoy the listen. CJ, I'm so glad you could join me today. How have you been?
Yeah, very good, man. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, of course. I had to listen to A Banquet, I don't know, a week or so ago, saw the film, and yeah, was stoked to have you on. It's a really interesting, strange score, and hearing those types of things always draws my attention.
Ah, cool. Yeah, glad you like.
Yeah, for sure. So I know that was actually I think your second collaboration with the director Ruth Paxton, the first being a short film, Be Still My Beating Heart, I think.
Yeah.
How did that collaboration start, and what's that working relationship like?
Firstly, Ruth's amazing. So I was pretty, I kind of landed on the short, Be Still My Beating Heart, and it just went so smoothly, and it was such fun to work on, and she was so great to work with. So to get to do a feature was pretty magic. The way I got it, I don't know, it's probably a good little story for people out there who are kind of starting out and stuff's getting kicked back, because that's kind of how I got the job. I'd been asked to do some trailer music for something, and I'd done something that I thought was pretty out there. I'd never done anything like that before. I was like pretty stoked on it, lots of very strange sounds, sent it off, and they were just like, nah, like none at all. This isn't what we want. And so I was like, that's a shame. But then like the day after I sent it or something, Hamish, who I work with, my agent, he was in a meeting and they were after something for this horror short, and he was like, oh, CJ's just sent me this. And they heard that and they were just like, oh, this is a thing. Let's have a conversation. So then I got on the phone with Ruth. We started speaking about it a bit more. I watched the film, loved it. And yeah, that's kind of from kind of a door shutting, then that one opened. And so yeah, it was pretty good.
Oh, that's amazing. And I think that's like totally unexpected. I guess that's one upside of a lot of trailer music. It feels like being more conventional is somehow it opened the door for you. So that's great.
Yeah, totally.
And so then moving on from the short to A Banquet, how did that conversation go? What sort of discussions were happening regarding you scoring and the composing process?
It was a really linear move from doing the short to the feature, because we spent a while thinking about what we were going to do in the short, and that was very much about restriction of breath. And so I wanted to use woodwind instruments, which I'd not really worked with before. And I worked with this great player called Naomi Thomas, and we just recorded her playing bass clarinet, loads of times. I sampled it super high sample rates for the geeks out there who are into that stuff, and pitched it down and started creating this very unique sound world. And Ruth really liked that, the fact that it had a very identifiable sound. So she started actually temping the score to the feature with a lot of the music from the short. So there was already that crossover of the sound world. she made the feature. She made A Banquet during lockdown. It was like one of the first films, like post the first lockdown in the UK, to go into production. I was like, wow, I can't believe you guys are out there making a film right now. She's like, yeah, we need to talk about the score. So we did, about how it was going to sort of develop from some of the ideas that we'd experimented with on the short.
Cool. It's so, because a lot of times you hear complaints about temp music, normally because it's from scores that other people have done. Was it weird having parts of the film temped with something that you'd already done? Like, was there a pressure to kind of recreate that somehow? Or was it just like a natural jumping off point?
Oh, it's kind of the dream, because then you're already in your own skin. So much about like working with the director is about the language that you use, and music is ultimately the thing you want to get out, but describing that and talking about it and the effect you want to have on the audience and the connection you want to have with the characters and the sound world you want to create in general. Sometimes it's really hard to pinpoint that when you're just talking about it, especially when you're referring to like other people's music, which, like you say, is often what gets used as the temp score. And you're like, what is it in that temp music that they're latching onto, and how can you bring that into your own sound world and transfer it kind of in your own image? We sort of didn't have that. I mean, she used other tracks as well. It wasn't just like all stuff from the short, but it just meant we had a really good point to start from.
Interesting. I mean, I guess that makes sense too, because I've talked with some composers who had a director temp the film with prior compositions, but the director interpreted the music differently than what the composer had intended. And so there was just like a fundamental disconnect. Whereas
Yeah,
here,
totally.
obviously, you had already collaborated on that music, so you would assumedly have already been completely on the same page. So that's actually really interesting. I like that.
Yeah, it was great. And then it was just about kind of upscaling it, or trying to go, well, this is the starting point. Where can we go? Really trying to understand the things that we're going to translate and the other things we were going to leave behind and step into the bigger scale of the feature film.
So the palette, I think, is actually really interesting, because you do have a lot of the stranger rumbling soundscapes, but then on a few of the tracks, there's like ethereal vocals and choirs. On earlier in the film, on the cue Lipstick, I think there's just like an odd assortment of, it sounds like some acoustic guitar, some type of idiophone, but just a bunch of different things going on. How did you, like you said, upscale the palette and the sound, and land on some of these eclectic choices?
I mean, firstly, like, it was really intense, but it was really fun, to get this assembled. Like, I had some really good musicians that I worked with and some really fun gear and processes and treatments that I'd done in the past and been experimenting with. I was like, oh, they can come to the fore now. Like, we can really go dark with this. There's a lot of talk around the fact that it's just sort of dipping its toes into horror, but ultimately it's this drama between these wonderful women and the trouble that they're getting into, and this idea that they're in this fishbowl, that as the film progresses, that things get more intense, the relationships get more strained, things get much, much darker as you go on. And so it's like, how do we get that darkness? How do we get all these different layers of what's going on in the film in like represented musically? And at the same time, having these beautiful human moments, especially earlier on in the film, like you say, where things can be more musical. The second we started talking about it being a fishbowl, kind of a step from doing the short film and working with woodwind, I was like, I want woodwind underwater. I want that muffled sound. I want the sound of the bubbles coming out with the muffled tone and slowing that right down and having that as a texture that can kind of sit in amongst whatever's happening musically. So it's all happening during lockdown, so it's quite hard to get together with people. So I sent like a hydrophone to my mate, Stephen Crow, who writes great operas, and he was playing. I saw it was just because he was playing on Instagram he had like the reed of a saxophone or a clarinet or something going into this hose pipe at the end of it, and I was just like, "Hey man, can you just stick the other end under the water and let me send you this stuff and just see what happens? It might sound terrible, it might sound amazing. I just want to get like a sample pack." And I sent him a bunch of stuff to play, so I sent him all that, and it came back. I was like, "Oh my god, this sounds amazing!" So that was like the first thing that I'd got that I started putting into samplers and turning into instruments just for myself. And then for like the horror thing, like I love what you can get out of very basic synthesizers. And I'd been doing a session with, it was lucky, he was like one of my favorite producers, a guy called Dan Carey. We were working on another project, and I told him about this. He's like, oh, you've got to check this synth out. It's called a Swarmatron. And he's this beautiful, very weird looking synthesizer that has lots of oscillators that you can tune so they beat against each other. And you just get that sound that gets under your skin, and you can have it as deep or as high pitched as you like, and you can get it to rise and fall, and you can be quite dynamic with it. So then that was the next step, was going to his studio and spending like hours and hours just creating and creating, and like we were bringing up scenes from the film, and then we were ignoring the scenes from the film and just creating the sound banks, and so that was like another layer that we could have. So to begin with, it was like just really exploring like a whole bunch of different sounds that I knew were going to work, that I could sample off and then work within whatever compositions kind of came and were inspired by the textures and tones of these sounds.
And when I read that you'd work with Dan Carey, I got really excited for a second that it was the Tool drummer Danny Carey, but you know.
Next time,
Yeah,
I'll be
next
well
time.
into that. Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, I love that. I love the level of exploration, experimentation that both indie films and it seems like more horror-focused films lend themselves to. But did that ever get overwhelming of being like, I'm going to go to the far corners to see what kind of sounds I can pull in? Or was it kind of liberating having fewer restraints on you to start off with?
I think I was just trying to be led by the film as much as possible. Like, see how, because you're getting early cuts through, and it was I went on set actually. I was quite lucky to just go down and see them filming. And I was chatting to Jess Alexander, who plays Betsy, and she was saying, "Oh, you missed this really intense session that we did last week." And I was like, "How intense was it?" And she like gave me a little bit of the scene, like just literally acted out. I was like, "Oh, okay, that's really intense." So like I already knew before I'd started on a single thing that we weren't going to hold back at all. And Ruth had said that there's going to be times where we can go like almost sonic assault. You really want to feel it. So like lots of low end frequencies, lots of piercing high end frequencies, and it was just choosing those points in the film where we could get to that spot. So it happens early on, and then it happens a lot later on too.
Yeah, and I don't want to give anything away, but there's a scene, maybe the second to last scene, that's basically the visuals, but your score as well is just oscillating between something brutal and pummeling and then rather serene, and that juxtaposition has such a strong effect that, just like you said, being able to take it to those extremes and then dial it back is like very effective and bewildering to the viewer, the listener.
Yeah, I mean that was just a great edit sequence. Like, in the acting's like next level, and you're just total by you should be fully absorbed at that point, and then you're just in this like swinging between these two extremes. Yeah, that was fun to do.
That, and I do like you mentioning that it is, I guess, if you want to put it in a bucket, it is a horror film, but the core of it is like a family drama, really, between these four women and three generations of women in this family. And I think that that's really important for a lot of horror films, to basically be a different film almost that has horror elements going on, because it becomes so much more relatable and so much more real, rather than just a guy with a machete chasing you. I mean, I like those too, but
Yeah.
is there a difficulty in striking that balance between the human, the family, the emotional elements, and then the unsettling, more horror-based aspects?
Yeah, I mean, definitely I don't know if it was a challenge in terms of the craft of like deciding how far to go down the horror, sort of like things you'd expect to hear in a horror. I think it's harder to sort of for how you pitch the film than it is to like make it, because
Hmm.
for Ruth, I think we never spoke about it really being horror in that way, but we were going to go there at points. Ultimately, this is about focusing on the relationships between the characters, and the horror element is just, it feels like it's coming out of something really real and something really relatable. It's not like something out there. It's something that people can identify with, who I think who are going through that age that Betsy, the character, the things that she's dealing with, and the way that the mother and the grandmother relate. Like, it all feels just very relatable, like a really, really, really intense family drama. It's almost
Yeah.
like drama didn't quite fit into drama because it pushed into horror, because that's how far Ruth wanted to take it, rather than it being a horror pulling down into drama. I think it feels like it's more that way round. It's like push the top off because you have this otherworldly element to it, dealing with mental health and how you deal with trauma as a family, and like lots of these issues, which horror feels like a natural next step into, for it to step into that world.
Yeah, I mean, and you could hear that with some of the musical choices too, where there are scenes or aspects of a conflict between the characters that, like, I don't want to say seems mundane or ordinary, because I think they're all heightened to an extent. But then the score pushes that even more to where, you're watching an argument over eating dinner. Literally just like, you need to eat more food. But then it just like pushes it to this fucking intense set of conflict.
I think because all the action, anything, even if it's just like a conversation between like June, the grandmother, and Betsy, there's this moment where they're trying to see eye to eye, or June's trying to see eye to eye. Like, again, a very sort of mundane scene, if you like. It's just domestic. It was very domestic, but actually throughout the whole film, there's just this undercurrent of unease, and the unease is what builds and builds and builds. And so musically, that's one of the most powerful ways to keep that unease present, even when you're just in a domestic moment. That was quite a challenge, as she was finding things that did that without being too intrusive or without being too leading. And so that's why I love texture, because texture can do that without a melody soaring around and leading you in a overtly emotional way. Texture can hold you in a position and then nudge you somewhere else. So like on that particular one, it's all like, it just sounds like the whole house is just under so much strain that it could just fall at any moment. So it's a bit industrial. It's like everything feels like it's creaking, but it's nothing discernibly, doesn't sound like creaking wood or anything. I think it was a bunch of clarinet taps really mangled that went into that. That's kind of what I enjoy the most, is like that crossover between the sound design and the musical elements, and how they can be as important as each other to create a vibe or put the audience in a place.
I do appreciate that explanation too, because you hear a lot of people complain about textures and drones and more ambiance coming in lieu of like pure melody. But there's so many times where that, for instance, having a melody would just seem very odd, or having a theme playing over top would break the immersion or break the spell.
Oh yeah, well it's got to be a balance, and the other thing is it's got to sound great. Like if it's just a generic drone that you could pick up off a sample pack, I get it. You don't want that. But I think if you really get into the detail and you find what is it that's in those sounds that is actually going to be emotive, and then you like actually pull it off, then it works really well. I just think there's been a lot of times when it's not been pulled off very well. Hopefully this isn't one of them. It's like if you're going to create drones, then like, there's thousands of very interesting ways that you can make drones and textures that people haven't heard before.
You could probably say that about a lot of things. I mean, there's a lot of films that can fall flat, or even doing more melodic aspects in film music or any type of music. People give textured music they look at it through a much more critical lens sometimes.
Yeah.
Not appreciating exactly what you're saying, that to do it well, you're not just taking some sample and using it, and that's that. There is a whole process behind it. Same with like creating a synth patch or something.
Yeah, or what scale are you going to use,
Yeah.
or what chord progression you're going to use. You can be lazy and obvious with that stuff too. Yeah, and it's just got to be about experimenting with the scene and it's how it fits in. Like the film as a whole, I think, is another really important bit. Like if it was just that, there'd be too much, which is why it was great to have moments like Lipstick, which are very musical, and it's like finding out how the chord progressions, how the instrumentation, how the way that it develops. It's almost like trying to capture the same thing that you're capturing with just the textual stuff, but in a musical sense, and just be more lyrical with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And having those elements too works particularly well in A Banquet, because the younger sister, she does figure skating. So there's both like some overt classical elements during sequences where she is skating, but then also in Lipstick, that's when she's, I think, doing some moves practicing inside the house. And so it has this imagery that I think we maybe subconsciously automatically associate with something that's going to be a bit more traditional or classical or melodic. And that's something that was interesting in that cue, is because it has some of those elements, it has that melody, but it has a lot of the noise and dissonance and chaos bubbling underneath. So you don't sit there and listen to it and go, oh, this is so beautiful. You go, there's like, this is nice, but there's something very ominous coming up.
Yeah, I'm glad you like picked up on that, because that was something that we did spend quite a while on, like doing versions that didn't have any of those elements and just letting the weirdness of the progression was that enough? But actually, the film is so visually rich as well. There's loads of little things in there, like just having a plate slightly too close to the edge, or just something a bit too perfect. The set design and even the clothing and stuff. I think it just has this unease about it. Like on surface level, okay, everything looks sort of fine and very domestic, and they're obviously well off and everything. But this undercurrent needs to be like always there, like omnipresent. Yeah, and how does that push and push and push through the film?
I'm glad you mentioned that because it's something I wasn't even thinking of. Like going back to the dinner scene about how much food to have. At one point, the mother then pours a bunch of peas onto a plate, but it's just like a oddly large amount of peas. It becomes a mountain of it. Those very little details where it's really easy to miss, you pick up on them, and it just keeps pushing the feeling that things are off. I just love those little details.
Yeah, I mean the tension just from that particular scene is especially it's, from a composer's perspective, that stuff's so great because there's already so much to latch onto. Again on paper it's a nice dinner, food looks great, beautiful black plates that look really expensive, but actually there's this undercurrent that's like something's not right, and what's going to happen? How's the not rightness going to be visible in this, in the next few minutes, and how do you build tension towards that or not, Yeah, it's fun to play with.
And I guess with the scene like that, where the tension as you watch it as it unfolds, like it's already there. Did you ever have a hesitancy to even put music in, or like a worry of the music being too much or making everything a bit too obvious?
Yeah, and that's just where like understanding the intention, like I got a version of the script early on and talking about just a general thing like how much music is there going to be, how full do you want this, how much do we want music to just be like a sound bed, or how much do we want it to really illustrate with something that we just ebbed and flowed as we were making it and living with it for a little bit and then being like, oh, actually let's pull back here because then this is going to be more powerful. Or I think if stuff's there and it's there as an option, and until you see it, until it's like hooked up, synced up to the visuals, you don't really know. And then it might work really well within the scene, but then in the context of the whole film, you might be, okay, there's too much there, let's pull back. So that was just something that, working closely with Ruth and with the producers, we kind of hopefully found a balance that works, by the end. I throw stuff at everything. I'd soundtrack every second. Like,
I can't speak for everyone, but I thought it worked, so.
Cool, thank you.
And what was it that drew you to work on this film other than you're already working with Ruth? Was there anything in particular about horror itself, or was it just an enticing project?
Just in general, like I'm very drawn to those sound palettes and that darkness. Weirdly, like a lot of the music that I kind of write for myself is much more up and colorful in a different way, like more like primary colors. Well, this is like darker, darker colors, and it's kind of weirdly very naturally drawn to those kind of sounds. And then for the film itself, when I read the script, I was just sort of sold within, halfway through the first act. I just thought it was such a fascinating way to explore the issues that are in it. I kind of don't want to give too much away, but like the issues that were within the film and what Betsy goes through, and people within my life who've experienced sort of similar things, and just been like, this, like, what a great way to explore this in this magical, mystical way that can be so powerful and can say so much. And so with those powers combined, I was in.
And I guess jumping off from that, of some of the other work that you're doing and how it is very different from your work on A Banquet, I realized that you'd actually scored 20 surf-related shorts and films and things like that. Can you really quickly tell me about how you got into it and how some of that music plays out?
Yeah, I used to play in a band called Swimming, and there was a director called Chris McLean who I ended up working on most of those 20 films with. And he heard something that we just put up, like a little demo thing. And yeah, eventually, like, he got hold of me. We chatted on the phone. We ended up on the phone for like 2 hours. And he was like, "Oh, can you?" It was just fascinating because all the surf films that he was making was like he was shooting in like Norway, Iceland, Ireland, all these places where I was like, "Wait, what? You're making like surf films there?" I don't have a surfing background, and he sent me over like what he was working on, and I just thought it was absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. And he was going out to these wild, remote parts of Northern Europe, and capturing these surfers surfing these like incredible waves in these beautiful parts of the world. And then he was like, "Yeah, we don't know what this really sounds like. We can't slap Dick Dale on this." And the kind of music that they were wanting to put on there, they were like using Boards of Canada and Forest Swords, like loads of people I was really into. And then he had a commission for Channel 4 and he was like, "Would you fancy writing something for this little film called Beyond the Scars?" And so I was like, "Yeah, not done stuff like this before, let's give it a go." And that was it. We did that one, went down well, and then kept coming through. It was a great film called Edges of Sanity. They often come with poetry. They get like a poet, there's a guy called Dan Crockett, who's like lots of his poetry is based on the natural world and the changes to the natural world, for better and for worse. He highlights a lot of issues around the environment because these people, they're on the edge. They're like out there surfing. They see the change, so they're very vocal about it, or a lot of them are vocal about it. And these films became a bit of a platform for that as well. And it was actually through someone seeing Edges of Sanity, being like, "Oh, did you score this? Oh, you did the sound design. Oh, would you like to have a go on a feature that we're working on? Just try a scene." And that was a film called Norfolk, which is an absolutely brilliant film. So I kind of approached it in the same way that I'd been approaching these surf films, where there wasn't really a template for it. There was just like, "Oh, this kind of music sounds cool. It's epic, it's big." You still have this connection with the individual surfers and their relationship with the environment. I guess that was just a really good place to understand the relationship between music and film, like, and how they could work together, how they could fight against each other. And then, through doing that, I got offered other jobs that were kind of not surf films, and that eventually led to A Banquet, which is my first solo score.
Interesting. And with scoring those films, I mean, what's your focus on? Like, because it has a mixture of the imagery and the poetry going on, are there specific aspects you try to accentuate or just make it sound good, or how does that work?
Yes, I mean, weirdly, like now, I did one recently actually, and I kind of think about it less because the instincts are up a bit from doing it so much. But before we would, we'd really think about it. We'd really talk about, me and Chris would talk a lot about just how big the waves are, like the color of the water, or whether this is going to be a fast edit or a slow edit. Do we want people to feel like they're there, or do we want people just to be excited by the fact people are there? It's like, how immersive are we going to be? How much is it going to be a spectator thing? How much energy do we want to push it? Like, how do you make something which is essentially just people getting in the water and surfing, like, dynamic over 15 minutes? What's the story around it? What's the mood? Like, is this just exciting, or is it more of a meditative piece? And across all the films that we did, we spanned quite a large, more than you'd expect for just that that subject. We kind of spanned more kind of approaches to it, and all of that was just like great, just great kind of immersion in sound to picture, I guess.
Interesting. And I know that you'd released a kind of a compilation, I guess you could call it, maybe 3.5 years ago, some of that. And I do find that just such an interesting muse almost. There's a European metal band called Apocalyptica who scored a oceanic documentary that's also just focused on like the majesty and daunting nature of waves, and it's all this basically cellos in an almost like metal voice.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
I just love that sort of stuff. So it's something that really fascinates me. And so I know that you've got that comp out, and I think you have some of those videos up too. So to anyone listening, I'd recommend giving them a watch or a little listen.
Well, I mean, stuff like Kayani Katsi, Philip Glass, like that. Some of that stuff was an influence for that. Where you're detached a little bit and you're watching on. Like, there's sometimes you do that, and other times you just try and write a cool track that would just match it, and be more like traditional surf films that I like watching just as a fan. I can probably talk about it now. It's coming out pretty soon. Like, people know it's coming, but I did the Apple series on the World Surf League, so that was like another level again of like, how do you take the experience I had of doing all these surf films before into a way that was gonna, can't think of a better way of saying it, but like crossover, so people who aren't into surfing at all or aren't part of the culture can appreciate what's going on behind the scenes with like the best surfers in the world surfing the best waves in the world, and what goes into that. So that was like another sort of like development from where I'd been to like do a project where it was just total immersion in that for like 7 months, just writing over surfers. Yeah.
Because that's forthcoming at some point. What was some of the palette or the sound that you use for that series?
Oh, just heavy drama, like for real, yeah. Like way more. Like there's some more moments that feel like they're maybe more out of the culture, but we spent a lot of time working out how to bring like this dramatic element to it. Yeah, I can't really talk too much about it, but like when
Not
we
fair
did
enough.
that was the thing. Yeah, that was the big takeaway was like, oh, okay, actually, no, this stuff works. Okay, let's get heavy. Let's get heavy with it. So yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Looking forward to that. And then I know that you were also working on a solo debut too. Is that still in the early stages? Is there any hints you can give out about that?
Yeah, so this some of the stuff was kind of coming before I started writing, like off the back of doing the surf stuff, and just kind of getting back to sort of writing. I guess some of it's quite like bandy, just like more bandy. There's guitars, there's vocals, there's real drums, and then I can't help but have been influenced by the amount of time that I've spent working to film. So some of those elements are kind of brought in for sure. But yeah, that's going to be called CJ's Mirror Maze. That's kind of going to
Awesome.
be like the the band project for that. But yeah, if all goes to plan, that'll be May. First track will drop for
Okay,
that.
cool. Very soon then.
Yeah.
Awesome. And I should have mentioned this a minute ago. You mentioning Philip Glass at all, or especially Clay Nascazzi, is like one of my favorite composers, one of my favorite pieces of music out there. So that's how you like make me a fan instantly.
Cool. Yeah, it's something else, isn't it? There hasn't been that much like that. Like, I kind of love those, maybe like Mogwai when they did that Zidane. I really like those. You really feel like you're looking through a lens, and the music totally like places that lens for you in this, really engaging way. Yeah, I like a lot of stuff like that.
Awesome, awesome. Well, CJ, with those comments, you've made me a happy guy for the rest of my days. So
That's
I
sweet.
think that's
Chantee's made me a happy guy, so all good.
that's a it's a great way to end things on. Once again, I appreciate you jumping on to chat with me a bit about A Banquet, which I think's out. I don't know if it's in theaters. It's out
It
everywhere on
is,
Pod
yeah,
at the very least.
yeah, and in UK theaters for another week or so.
Okay, cool.
Um,
But yeah, thanks again, man. I appreciate you jumping on chat with me. It's a Monday, so still early in the week, but
yeah.
enjoy the rest of the week.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's great to chat.
Of course.